So you may be wondering what an argumentative essay is. And so we're going to look a little bit about that now, what it is, what your assignment conditions are, and some examples to give you a little bit of an idea of how to go about this. So hopefully you'll go through it at school as well, but this can just foreground that. So, an argumentative essay, now this definition is taken from the syllabus. An argumentative essay takes a position on a topic, so like a legal reform issue, decision, or policy, and then it's presenting arguments that support that position. So it can be structured either by presenting the opposing view first and then countering this view with stronger evidence, or vice versa. So you're basically going to be given some kind of legal issue, human rights issue, and you're going to need to argue the effectiveness of that the law that relates to that, and analyze it with the different aspects that are good or bad, and provide all of that information in that argumentative kind of format. So I guess you can think of it as being quite closely related to the persuasive sort of speeches that I'm sure you're familiar with from all these years of English that you've been through. So it's just in essay format, so it's not going to be as it's not going to be a speech. It's an essay with greater sort of formality, I suppose. So just like every humanities subject at school, it's again 1,500 to 2,000 words and 4 weeks, including 10 hours of class time to work on this. So use those words up is a tip that I'll give right now. There are plenty of things to say in each of these assignments for things like business, English, and legal studies. So I definitely recommend going and using all the words that you're given. A couple more practice questions as well. So the International Court of Justice, does it hear disputes between nations? Is it the one that prosecutes those crimes like genocide and war crimes, or does it monitor the human rights and report to the United Nations? So I guess this is illustrating the idea that a lot of these terms are quite similar. And so even though you might know it, also actually being able to just tell the difference between really similar sounding things, make sure you've definitely got the right one. That's important for the external exam, of course. For the argumentative essay, you'll have open access to all the resources. Now, I mentioned the syllabus a few times today, and so that's the QCEE website. Now, I definitely recommend accessing that for all of your subjects. Every subject has a syllabus with all the information you need to know about how you'll be assessed and what you'll be assessed on. So you also have example responses. So example responses to tasks and example task sheets like this one, which are giving you that kind of idea of what the sort of scenario will be like that you'll be given and what the requirements are for you in terms of responding to that scenario. So in this case, we've got an argumentative essay in response to the question, to what extent will the proposed Commonwealth Modern Slavery Act 2018 be effective in addressing human rights issues found in international supply chains? So, and then also one recommendation to further improve the human rights outcomes for international workers. So, in this, I suppose in persuasive writing, in English, you generally would have your 3 argument paragraphs that are talking just about why you are right. Sometimes you might have a rebuttal paragraph, but you're basically sticking to your argument with high modality to show that you're certain about it. In this, it's more analytical, so it's important for you to be discussing both sides of the story. So you can see in this question that it does say to what extent. So usually it's going to be somewhere in the middle. It's not going to be perfect, because you do need to make at least one recommendation, of course. So there does need to be some room for improvement. But usually it's got some value as well. So there are some good things for you to point out too. So all of those things, with what to include, selecting the legal information from sources on one aspect of modern slavery. So wages, conditions, etc. So you're narrowing it down because, of course, the Modern Slavery Act is going to be very broad with different slavery issues. So concentrating on one thing for your task. Analyzing one case study, where Australian businesses have workers in supply chains overseas. So this is a research-related task as well, with looking at finding examples to include. Identify applicable legal concepts within Article 4 of the Human Rights Declaration. And determine the nature and scope of modern slavery in your case study. So again, all of these sorts of terms with nature and scope, you can find them in the glossary at the end of the syllabus document. So if you haven't already visited the syllabus, I definitely recommend that. And then, of course, evaluating alternatives and justifying your recommendation with legal criteria. So the legal criteria part is important, as well. It can't just be, it can't be non-legal. So a recommendation you could give could be a good idea, but it might not actually be legal. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So, like I mentioned, the QCEE has the syllabus. They have example tasks like the one we just looked at, and they also have example responses. So these responses will be labeled with how they were marked. So you'll be able to see the marking rubric and what it scored for each of the criteria. And it also has highlighting throughout to show you how the response correlates with the criteria. In this case, I've done my own highlighting, and you can see that there is a lot of it. This is the introduction from the QCEE example of this response. And it's responding to that example that we just looked at here, the Modern Slavery Act. So what it includes: explanation of the issue to be discussed, giving some context. You're stating what the essay will be arguing. So, for example, here you can see it is arguable how effective the bill is to address human rights in supply chains. So then outlining the essay as well, including specifying what the case study is. So in this case, they've chosen to focus on the fishing industry of Thailand for the case study. And they're explaining that this will be analyzed and evaluated and a recommendation will be given. So showing your knowledge of the general context, telling them what you'll be arguing, giving that outline of what the case study is, and using basically the words that are in the task sheet. You need to analyze and evaluate and provide a recommendation. So your last practice question 10, what are the 3 terms that all refer to a legally binding agreement between states? Hopefully this one comes to you pretty naturally by now. Some of them might be more straightforward than others, but those 3 words that have come up throughout today's lecture. Now, the thing about Year 11 is that usually it gives you a really good idea of what will happen in Year 12, and it's reflecting the different assessment tasks. So hopefully in Year 11 you did get experience doing an argumentative essay, and at that stage it probably was on civil law, if you had the same experience as me. But it could have been on criminal law because different schools do different orderings of when they cover the content. So this is just from my Year 11 civil law assignment, which was the argumentative essay genre as well. So mine was about negligence, and it was about a driving scenario. So giving information again about under Queensland law, this particular idea of negligence, I'm saying that just and equitable outcomes won't be achieved. So I'm clearly stating in that first sentence, what am I talking about and what is my position on it? Then I'm explaining again those ideas of what will be done in this introduction. So I suppose the difference between my introduction and the introduction of the other example was they provided a bit more description of the general sort of situation, with defining like globalization, for example. So you'll find that the parts that are in the body are going to be most important, because that's where all your analysis and evaluation comes in. But in the introduction, you will see, if you have a look at the example, QCEE example, you need the features and conventions of an introduction. I believe that's the wording. So, so keeping it short, to use your word count elsewhere, but still giving that idea of what will I talk about, what is my case study, and what is my position on the issue. So I figured that you'll be able to look for yourselves to see that QCEE example. So I decided to include more snippets from my essay from civil law, so you can have an example. So I have also done some highlighting as well, so you can see how I've approached it. So citing the different legislation is something that you'll need to do. So it could be, since it's human rights in this case, it could be treaties or convenants that you're citing rather than like it was for me. So I have explained what the requirements are for a negligence action, because if I'm arguing that the requirements don't lead to just and equitable outcomes, logically I need to explain I need to explain the broad situation of how the current law works in order to then explain why I believe it's not effective, and then how it needs to be improved. So you can see the analysis here of I'm giving an example of why this is good. So it provides the opportunity for the matter to be resolved without going to trial. They have a compulsory conference system, but the power imbalance between the parties involved doesn't result in those just and equitable outcomes. And then delving into that even deeper, why not? So things like affordability as well, and explaining that full situation. So you're really digging deep into why it wouldn't be just and equitable. Another body snippet and a conclusion snippet as well. So using a precedent case. So in your argumentative essay, you saw that you'll need an example of a scenario that you've chosen. So the example in the QCEE one was fishing in Thailand. So here I've got a precedent case, and then using that to explain what the law is. So according to this precedent, the standard of care owed by inexperienced drivers is equal to that of any other driver. And then applying that to the scenario as well. So my scenario, I had a 20-year-old driver who had only been driving for 2 months. So you may think they need more leniency in the way that they are seen before the law, but they are actually, according to that precedent, as responsible as any other motor vehicle operator for taking reasonable care to avoid injury to others. So yeah, you can see all of your ideas, you just build on them. So if you provide a precedent case, you then apply it to your case study in question. If you are claiming that, if you're explaining the current system and you want to say that it's not just and equitable, then you need to explain why and give a real picture of what that all looks like. Now, your conclusion, keep in mind that there are going to be big differences because this is the civil law example. But just in general, you're going to need to always have that idea of recommendations at the end. So here I'm saying greater emphasis should be put on settling matters prior to court proceedings. So I'm saying this current conference system could be broadened, and I'm giving an example of what it could be like. So it could imitate the alternate dispute resolution pathway. And why is this a good idea? This would ensure just and equitable outcomes since the power imbalance of parties would be offset. So that is an example of how you would conclude it, with wrapping everything up and providing your recommendations. So I suppose you can see that it's argumentative, because you are arguing the just and equitable outcomes in this case, but it's more formal and you're not going to be emotional like you would be in a persuasive speech. It's very factual.